Welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about rotator cuff injury. In this topic, we are going to cover anatomy, pathophysiology, clinical examination, investigations, treatment modalities, and then come to an overall conclusion. So let us start with anatomy first. Rotator cuff is made up of four interrelated muscles arising from scapula and attaching to the tuberosities. These four muscles are supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, and long head of biceps plays a functional part in it. So in this slide we can see from the front subscapularis, which arises from the subscapular fossa and attaches on to the lesser tubercle, and from the back we can see supraspinatus and infraspinatus and teres minor. So supraspinatus arises from supraspinatus fossa and attaches to the greater tuberosity, and then infraspinatus arises from the infraspinatus fossa and attaches to the greater tuberosity, and teres minor which arises from upper two-third of lateral border of scapula and attaches to the greater tuberosity. Function of these muscles: they act as stabilizers of shoulder, mainly anterior and posterior cuff, providing fixed fulcrum for concentric rotation of the humeral head. They neutralize the shearing forces of deltoid in early abduction and then help in initial abduction and then rotation of the shoulder. Pathophysiology: the extrinsic hypothesis. Repeated impingement of rotator cuff tendon against different structures of the glenohumeral joint. Three distinct impingement syndromes are anterior-superior impingement syndrome, posterior-superior impingement syndrome, and antero-internal impingement syndrome. Here in this figure we can see that supraspinatus tendon is seen passing beneath the coracoacromial arch, causing impingement. Let us move on to anterior-superior impingement syndrome. Impingement beneath the coracoacromial arch is called as anterior-superior impingement syndrome. In 1972, Neer termed impingement syndrome. So supraspinatus tendon insertion to the greater tuberosity and bicipital groove must pass beneath the arch with forward flexion of the shoulder, especially if internally rotated, causing an impingement. Now, acromion is morphologically classified by Bigliani et al. Based on its anterior slope. So type 1 is flat, where 3% of accounting for about 3% of cuff tears. Type 2 is curved, accounting for about 24% of cuff tears, and type 3 is hooked, accounting for about 73% of cuff tears. Patients with cuff tears are more likely to have a curved or hooked acromion, as it was seen in a study done by Tivioni DA et al. In 1995 and Tute et al. In 1995. Then Flatto et al. Stereophotogrammetry showed that type 3 acromia had increased contact. Ozaki study on cadavers showed that the undersurface of the acromion was normal when the incomplete tears was on the articular side. Then this is a slide showing modified knees developmental stage of impingement syndrome. It is divided into three stages: 1, 2, and 3. Stage 1 is the stage of edema and hemorrhage. Stage 2 is fibrosis and tendinitis. Stage 3 is bone spurs and tendon ruptures. In stage 1, the typical age of the patient is 25 years. Differential diagnosis includes subluxation and acromioclavicular joint arthritis. Clinical course is reversible and the treatment is conservative. In stage 2, typical age of the patient is 25 to 40 years old. Differential diagnosis include frozen shoulder, calcium deposits. Clinical course is recurrent pain with activity, and treatment is consider bursectomy or division of coracoacromial ligament. In stage 3, the typical age of the patient is more than 40 years, and differential diagnoses are cervical radiculitis and neoplasms. Clinical course is progressive disability, and treatment is anterior acromioplasty or rotator cuff repair. In posterior superior impingement syndrome, Here the impingement is between the articular side of the supraspinatus tendon and posterior superior edge of the glenoid cavity, which was described by Walsh in 1991. This may explain some of the articular side, especially in overhead sport athletes. With shoulder held at 120 degree of abduction, retropulsion, and in extreme external rotation, similar to the late cocking phase in throwers, the labrum moves away from the glenoid, and the glenoid rim comes in contact with the deep surface of the tendon, producing repeated microtraumas and leading to partial tears. Then there is anterior internal impingement syndrome, described by Gerber in 1985, the impingement of the cuff in the coracohumeral interval. When the shoulder is held in flexion and internal rotation, the coracohumeral distance is reduced from 8.6 mm, and when the arm is at the side to 6.7 mm. Subcoracoid impingement can be idiopathic, example a large coracoid tip, iatrogenic or following a fracture, example humeral head or a neck fracture. Then there are certain hypotheses. One of them is the intrinsic hypothesis. It is the progressive age-related degeneration of the tendon. Von Meyer was the first to introduce the concept that degeneration of the tendon plays a major role in production of cuff lesions. Many histologic studies show the age-related degeneration of the cuff tendon. Critical zone described by Codman, articular surface of the tendon near its insertion on the greater tuberosity. He had described that there is a hypovascularity in this critical zone. Recent studies using laser Doppler done by Swiontkowski and associates normal flow in this zone of normal tendon. In Rathbun et al., relative avascularity of the cuff is position dependent and observed a poor filling only when the shoulder is in adduction. Normal degenerative processes associated with aging then is the main factor to explain the lesion of articular side of the cuff. Then let's come on to the clinical presentation. Patient presents to us with stiffness, which is more common with partial tears. Stiffness can be demonstrated as limitation of internal rotation with arm in abduction. Patient is unable to reach up to the back, unable to do cross body adduction, flexion and external rotation. Then there may be pain or weakness. Pain may be located anterolaterally or superiorly, aggravated by the use of arm in overhead position or flexion. There is weakness and associated crepitus, clicking or clunking or grinding sensation. Let us come on to the non-specific but very sensitive tests for rotator cuff injuries. Number one is Hawkins test. In Hawkins test, the test is performed in forward flexing the humerus to 90 degrees and forcibly internally rotating the shoulder. The greater tuberosity is driven under the coracoacromion ligament. It is positive if there is an impingement pain. Knee sign. In this, the examiner raises the affected arm in forced forward elevation while stabilizing the scapula, causing the greater tuberosity to impinge against the acromion. This test causes pain with impingement lesion in all the stages. Then there is Nees test. It is the most diagnostic test. Here we administer local 10 ml lignocaine into the subacromial bursa. The pain is relieved by more than 50%, and the rotator cuff tendinitis or partial tear of the bursal surface. Pain relief is there, but the weakness still persists in case of full thickness tears. If there is no relief, then probably the diagnosis is incorrect or the injection technique is wrong. Job's apprehension or relocation test. This is to distinguish between primary or secondary impingement. With patient in supine, arm is abducted to 90 degrees and externally rotated. Application of posteriorly directed force to the humeral head, relocating it into the glenoid, does not change the pain in case of primary impingement, but the pain is relieved in case of secondary impingement. Then let us move on to topographic tests to localize the site of lesion. For supraspinatus tendon, we do Job's test. The shoulder is placed at 90 degree of abduction and 30 degree of flexion. Shoulders elevation is restricted. Test is positive if the pain is noted. Internal rotation resistance stress test. Here the shoulder is placed at 90 degree of abduction and 80 degree of external humeral rotation. A manual isometric muscle test is performed in external rotation and compared with internal rotation. Here the test is positive if the patient has positive impingement sign with strong external rotation but a weak internal rotation. Then Gerber subarachnoid impingement test. This is to identify impingement between rotator cuff and coracoid process. Arm is forward flexed in 90 degrees and adducted to 10 to 20 degrees across the body. This brings the coracoid close to the lesser trochanter. Pain in this maneuver suggests a positive test. Speed test. This is for bicep tendonitis. Patient forward flexes the shoulder to 90 degrees with elbow extended and forearm supinated. Resistance is applied to the forearm. Positive result produces pain in the bicipital groove. Yergason supination sign. The elbow is flexed at 90 degree and the forearm is pronated. Patient attempts to supinate the forearm actively against resistance at the wrist. Pain is localized to the bicipital groove, indicating inflammation of the long head of biceps. Then Gerber lift-off test for the subscapular tendon. The shoulder is placed passively in internal rotation and slight extension by placing the hand 5 to 10 centimeters from the back with palm facing outwards and the elbow flexed at 90 degree. Test is positive when the patient cannot hold this position with the back of the hand hitting the patient's back. Then there is belly press test. Patient presses the abdomen with flat of the hand and exempts to keep the arm in maximal internal rotation. If the internal rotation is strong, the elbow doesn't drop backwards. If the strength of the subscapularis is hampered, maximal internal rotation cannot be maintained and the elbow drops backwards. External rotation lag sign. This is for integrity of the supraspinatus and infraspinatus muscle. Elbow is passively flexed to 90 degree and shoulder is held at 20 degree of elevation and near the maximal external rotation. Patient is asked to maintain the position as the examiner releases the wrist while maintaining support at the elbow. This test is positive when there is a lag or an angular loop is noted. Then internal rotation lag sign. This is to test the integrity of supraspinatus tendon. The affected arm is held at almost 90 degrees of internal rotation, elbow is flexed at 90 degrees and shoulder is elevated to 20 degrees and 20 degrees of extension. In this, the patient is asked to hold this position as the examiner releases the wrist. Positive, again if there is a lag. Then there is infraspinatus isolation test or the external rotation stress test. Shoulder is positioned at 0 degree of elevation, elbows against the waist flexed at 90 degrees and 45 degree of internal rotation. Shoulder external rotation is resisted. Test is positive if it produces pain and EMG shows that this is the optimal infraspinatus isolation test. Drop sign. This is to test the integrity of infraspinatus tendon again. The affected arm is held at 90 degrees of elevation in the scapular plane and at almost full external rotation with the elbow flexed at 90 degree. Patient is asked to maintain this position as examiner releases the wrist while supporting the elbow. Again the test is positive if there is a lag or a drop. The Patty's test for teres minor. The shoulder is placed at 90 degree of abduction, neutral rotation and in plane of the scapula. The examiner holds the elbow of the patient and the external rotation is resisted. Test is positive if it produces pain. Now this is a slide showing diagnostic accuracy of clinical tests for different degrees of subacromial impingement syndromes. From this table it can be concluded that these tests are very sensitive and specific and they have a good overall accuracy. Differential diagnoses include adhesive capsulitis, bicipital tendinitis, cervical disc diseases, cervical myofascial pains, cervical spondylosis, fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis and thoracic outlet syndrome. Let us move on to investigations. Basic investigation is the X-ray. So in the X-ray, in AP view, we can see acromiohumeral index. Normally it is more than 7 millimeters, but if it is less than 5 millimeters, then there is a poor prognosis. In bilateral and axillary views, we see the shape of acromion for os acromial, and in AP of ACJ for osteophytes, and AP in abduction for rotator cuff dysfunctions. Radiographic features include subchondral sclerosis of the humeral head, flattening of the greater tuberosity, sclerosis of the acromion, which is also known as the Sorsal sign, then calcifications located in the presumed area of rotator cuff tendons, acromion spurs, and acromion type 2 and 3. This is a X-ray picture showing subchondral sclerosis of the humeral head. This shows acromiohumeral space which is less than 6 mm in case of a chronic full thickness tear. This shows a bony spur on the inferior surface of the acromion. Then arthrogram. Arthrogram has its own pros and cons. In pros, it is good for diagnosis of complete rotator cuff tear. It is cost effective. Cons are that it is invasive and does not give information about the size of the tear. This is a slide of arthrogram in which we can see in the first picture that there is a channel between articular capsule and subacromial subdeltoid bursa in a complete rotator cuff tear. And in the second picture, we can see that there is a presence of contrast medium in subdeltoid or subacromial bursa, again a sign of complete rotator cuff tear. Then let us move on to ultrasound. Ultrasound is cheap and quick to perform. There is a good definition of rotator cuff, allows dynamic examination, it is operator dependent, and findings include non-visualization of the cuff, localized absence, discontinuity or focal abnormal echogenicity. MRI. MRI is the best diagnostic aid. It defines the site of cuff damage, demonstrate fatty changes in the muscle for poor quality, and exact size, shape and location of the tear can be seen, and it is non-invasive. So in first picture we can see that this is a normal cuff, and in the second picture we can see that there is a full thickness tear. Then let us move on to management. First is conservative management. McLaughlin in 1962 advanced reasons to avoid early repair. So these were 25% of the cadavers had torn cuff, most of them were asymptomatic. In 50% of the patients, it was found that they would recover comfortably. Results of early and late repair are similar. Repair did not always permit anatomical restoration, and early diagnosis is difficult. A review of literature indicates that success rate of non-operative treatment ranges from 33% to 92%. Bartolozzi et al. In 1994 reported 66 to 75% good or excellent results, mean follow-up of 20 months. Unfavorable prognostic factors were tears more than 1 centimeter square, symptoms more than 1 year, and significant functional impairment. Hawkins and Dunlop in 1995 reported more than 50% satisfactory results at average follow-up for 4 years. Then Boker et al. In 1993 reported 74% satisfactory results over a period of 7.6 years in 53 patients. 86% of those present within 3 months responded favorably, while only 56% of those presented after 6 months were satisfactory. Itoi and Tabata in 1992 reported 82% satisfactory results in 62 shoulders, followed for 3.4 years. Orthotherapy. This term was used by Michael Wirth in 1997. interactive exchange between patient and orthopedic surgeon directed at creating exercise regimen that gradually improves motion and strength in the shoulder girdle. This included 3 phases, where the phase 1 is restore full painless range of motion, Codman pendulum exercises followed by passive movements in all directions. Phase 2 designed to strengthen the remaining muscles of rotator cuff, deltoid and scapular muscles. Phase 3 gradual reinstitution of normal activities including work, hobby or sports. Then we can give subacromial corticosteroid injections. In this, there is a combination of local anesthetic and steroid, 5 to 10 ml. Maximum up to 2 to 3 injections can be given. Here the patient is asked to sit with arm hanging by the side. Needle is inserted just under the acromion from anterolateral, lateral or posterolateral aspect. It should have an easy unrestricted flow of fluid to ensure that it was correctly done. So benefits of corticosteroid injections are that there is a short-term benefit in reducing pain and increasing the range of motion. Risks include decreased tendon strength and risk of rupture if into the tendon, subcutaneous atrophy, effects on the articular cartilage, may have detrimental effects on results of subsequent repairs. Let us move on to operative treatment. Here patient selection is very important. Samuelson and Binder propose that patient physiologically under 60 years and clinically or arthrographically demonstrable full thickness cuff tear and failure to improve on non-operative management for a minimum of 6 weeks needs to use shoulder and overhead elevation, full passive range of motion and ability and willingness to cooperate. Poor prognostic factors include old age group, long history, no history of trauma, smoker, multiple steroid injections and diffuse osteopenia. Then rotator cuff tear are classified on the basis of size by Guardsman. Small tear less than 1 centimeter, medium tears 1 to 3 centimeters, large 3 to 5 centimeters and massive more than 5 centimeters. Procedures: repair of the tear can be done open or arthroscopic, tendon to tendon or tendon to bone, arthroscopic debridement and acromioplasty with mini open repair. Need described 4 major objectives. The closure of the cuff defect, elimination of impingement lesion of coracoacromial arch, preservation of origin of deltoid and rehabilitation to prevent post-op stiffness. Technique of open repair. In this our approach, we have to take 5 to 7 centimeter incision extending from lateral aspect of the anterior third of acromion to the lateral tip of coracoid. As we can see from the image below, the anterior acromioplasty, here the skin incision is made in skin lines across the anterior corner of acromion and acromion is exposed by incision in the tendon between anterior and lateral deltoid, and the incision on the deltoid is along the muscle fibers. Subacromial decompression can be done by coracoacromial ligament release, anterior acromioplasty and modified acromioclavicular arthroplasty. Here the incision is centered on the anterolateral corner of the acromion, avoiding the axillary nerve and carried medially onto the superior surface of the acromion. The deltoid origin is elevated from the acromion in continuity with the acromial periosteum and trapezius insertion. Then anterior extent of the acromion has to be removed. Then let us come on to the rotator cuff repair. First of all, we have to assess the nature of tear and then mobilize. In mobilization, we have to release the adhesion, release of coracohumeral ligament. Then there is interval slide and subscapularis tendon transfer. The repair can be done tendon to tendon or tendon to bone, as described by McLaughlin. First, mobilization. The capsule is released from the labrum As we can see from the first image, that the capsule is separated from the labrum first, and then the cuff tendons are released from the coracoid. This figure demonstrates in brief how the operation is carried out. The A and B images show mobilization, where the supraspinatus and subscapularis are released from the coracoid, and there is lateral mobilization of retracted cuff, and it is facilitated by release of these attachments. C and D shows that substantial lateral advancement of the cuff can be achieved by freeing the capsule from glenoid by sharply incising the capsule and its insertion into the glenoid labrum. Figure E shows that we have osteotomized and created a trough over the greater tuberosity, and then holes are drilled into the tuberosity, into the trough that we have created, and then suture anchors are passed through these holes, and thereby suturing the muscle onto this trough. This is an image showing transosseous repair described by McLaughlin, where the sutures are passed through the bony holes that we have created, and the cuff edge is drawn deep into the trough. Advantages of open repair are that it is easy to do. No special equipment is required. It allows direct visualization of cuff repair and acromioplasty, and it allows a good long-term follow-up. Disadvantages include that deltoid detachment is required. Then false positive studies where in case of arthrogram 2% and MRI 10% will lead to unnecessary open exploration. Unrepairable tears will be opened, and significant intra-articular pathology will be missed. Let us move on to another modality, that is arthroscopic repair of rotator cuffs. Advantages are that it is less morbid, ability to identify and treat other pathology as well. Truly outpatient, allows to address small undetected tears as well, and patient acceptance is more. Disadvantages are that it is technically difficult, implant costs need anchor, so the cost is higher, increased operative time, and high failure rate during learning curve. Here we can see that the hole is drilled into the bone, and anchor sutures are taken arthroscopically. Here we can see that tendons are sutured side to side in an arthroscope. Let us move on to another arthroscopic assisted mini open repair, where lateral portal can be expanded, and it is useful for small and moderate shaped tears. Results are comparable to open repair. Combined advantage include easy to do with modest arthroscopic skills, allows for arthroscopic correction of intra-articular pathology, well established improvement in perioperative morbidity in 2 large studies with no increase in complication of compromise in outcome, and it is cost effective. Easy to bail out to full operation procedure if desired, and it avoids opening patients with fall positive studies, and it avoids opening patient with unrepairable defects. Post-operative plan, it depends on the size of tear, type of tear, degree of retraction, intraoperative motion limits, and age of the patient. Post-operative plan in arthroscopic operations, immediate active to passive range of motion are started. Active abduction more than 60 degree is avoided for 3 to 4 weeks. Then electrical stimulation resisting exercises for 3 to 4 months, and high demand activities within 4 to 6 months. In open, we have to proceed slowly, and active flexion or abduction is avoided for 4 weeks, requires 1 to 2 additional months compared to arthroscopic operations. In phase 1 for open surgeries, phase 1 we do protective where we have to protect the repair, but movements have to be regained and prevention of muscle weakening has to be kept in mind. In phase 2, we focus on strengthening when healing is secure and 2/3 normal range of motion has to be achieved. In phase 3, we have to focus on returning to work or sport and entry requirements, full range of motion, no pain or tenderness. Then let us move on to partial thickness tears. 3 types or subtypes were described by Codman, which included bursal side tears, articular surface tears, or intratendinous tears. Then surgical options are debridement alone, debridement with arthroscopic subacromial decompression, open repair or acromioplasty, arthroscopic repair, arthroscopic subacromial decompression with mini open repair. Ellman classified depth based on depth of the tear. Type 1 0 to 3 mm, type 2 3 to 6 mm, and type 3 more than 6 mm. Here this is an arthroscopic image which shows partial thickness tears before and after the debridement. Our last topic is irreparable tears. Preoperative diagnosis for irreparable tears include AHI index less than 3 millimeters, profound loss of external rotation. On MRI, we see fatty degeneration of the muscle. Treatment options include debridement, tendon transposition, subscapularis or infraspinatus, muscle transfer, partial repair, or allograft substitution. Debridement for debridement indications are age more than 60 years. There is a good external rotation, good flexion, and good relief with subacromial local injections. In debridement, we have to excise all frayed margins of the tissues. We do not excise the coracoacromial ligament. Anterosuperior translation of the humeral head is prevented, and minimal debridement of acromion is done. This is a picture showing tendon transposition. Here the part of subscapularis or infraspinatus are transferred superiorly, and which disrupts coupling forces of subscapularis and infraspinatus. So we can see here that the supraspinatus and infraspinatus tendons are sutured superiorly over the humerus. Partial repair of massive rotator cuff tear explained by Burkhardt et al. For functional rotator cuff tear. Here the force couples have to be intact, the fulcrum has to be stable, edge has to be stable, and suspension bridge has to be intact. As we can see from this image that the inferior half of infraspinatus and subscapularis are acting as suspension bridge which are attached to the humerus superiorly. Burkhardt et al. For partial rotator cuff tears in irreparable cuffs showed that there were 2 excellent, 6 good, and 5 fair, and 1 poor result. This preserves the normal mechanics as compared to the tendon transfer. Then muscle transfers. Main indication for muscle transfer is symptomatic rotator cuff defect that has low probability of repair. 2 parameters are used: static subluxation of humeral head and degree of degeneration and atrophy of the rotator muscles. So for substitution of individual muscles, for subscapularis we can use trapezius, pectoralis major, and pectoralis minor. For supraspinatus, trapezius or deltoid can be used, and for infraspinatus, latissimus dorsi or teres major can be used. Latissimus dorsi transfer was described by Gerber in 1992. Indication is irreparable rotator cuff tear involving the supra or infraspinatus muscles. Functioning subscapularis or deltoid should be present. Teres major transfer described by Selly in 1998. Indication was isolated infraspinatus tear, but supraspinatus has to be functional, and they have reported that 6 cases with good results. Let us move on to complications of the rotator cuff repair. Re-tear or failure of the repair can occur. Infections, adhesions, fracture of acromion, denervation of deltoid, injury to suprascapular nerve, greater tuberosity fracture, stiffness or frozen shoulder, reflex sympathetic dystrophy. Then let us move on to arthropathy. End stage rotator cuff disease, which accounts for about 4% of cases. Age is generally elderly patients from 70 to 80 years of age. Severe shoulder pain, active elevation only up to 40 to 60 degrees. There is severe wasting of supraspinatus and infraspinatus, and there is effusion anteriorly. Superior subluxation of the humerus is noted. On radiograph, we see superior translation of the humerus head, loss of articular cartilage, femoralization of the proximal humor, acetabularization of the upper glenoid, and direct articulation of the head with coracoacromial arch. Treatment for this is intractable pain unresponsive to conservative treatment is the strongest indication for surgery. Options are shoulder arthrodesis, hemi replacement arthroplasty, or a total replacement of the shoulder. Prerequisite for arthroplasty are adequate deltoid power and preserved reconstructed coracoacromial arch. Conclusion is, first we have to for a good diagnosis, a good history and examination has to be done. Non-operative management remains the standard initial care. Surgery is done only in selective active individuals. Arthroscopy is done for early mobilization and decreased morbidity, and treatment is done according to the patient's functional needs. Thank you.